Welcome back to the Disrupt Education podcast. Alli, what's going on? What's happening?
Well, I'm getting ready for a 4-day skydiving extravaganza this weekend. It's going to be great. I'm going to a new drop zone.
Yeah.
So that'll be a new experience, a new challenge, but just living the dream. End of summer, right? By the time this comes out though, it'll be fall.
Yeah.
Uh,
Blueberry season,
but
though. I've seen you picking some blueberries.
it's the last of the blueberries, unfortunately.
All
It's more
right.
blackberry season and tomato season right now.
Got a few of those in our small Chicago backyard here, but they're growing. I just got to keep my dog, who is laying right over my shoulder here, if you're watching on YouTube. She was picking out one today, so I had to let her know, hey, no tomatoes. So, but enough of that. I actually am going to tell you I am nervous because my worst grade in high school was chemistry, and I am surrounded by science teachers right now. Not only obviously Alli, but our guest today is Joe Milliano. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I don't know where to begin, so if you can give a brief introduction. I won't let Alli do it because you guys, I don't know, science teachers together scare the heck out of me. So you get to give yourself an intro today. So give us a little idea of who you are and what you're doing these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, I'm Joe Milliano. I am a high school physics teacher is what I teach. I teach at Clayton High School in St. Louis, Missouri. We are a rare high school in that, we require physics for a graduation requirement, so all students take physics. It's not a state of Missouri requirement, but it is for our high school. And we are also rare in that we run a what's called a physics first program. So physics is actually the first science our high school students take as freshmen, and then they go on to chemistry from there and biology as juniors. And so I get to teach lots of students, and what's really great is the freshmen will come in very nervous about taking physics, as a lot of people are, and a lot of them end up loving it by the end. It was also hard for them, but it was a good challenge, and so it's a really great place to be, and I love doing it.
I think I would have done better there, Alli, in science. I'll just be honest.
You don't have to double up on physics. You couldn't have avoided it. It just would have been like your roadmap. And then you would have had all the science and just think about going back to that and reliving it.
There might be a nightmare there for a moment, but yes, as I get to know Joe a little bit more in this podcast, I think I'll be all right. But Joe, tell me a little bit more then. How do you, so as freshmen coming in, the intimidation factor, what are some of the interesting strategies that you use to kind of connect it to basically the human experience?
Physics very much is a great science for freshmen because it can relate to the human experience in so many ways. It is a very tangible science and very hands-on. When you're dealing with things like chemistry, you're dealing with atoms and things that are microscopic you can't see. With our freshmen, we are looking at the science of carts going down hills or throwing a ball through, across the football field or whatever, things that they can actually see and relate back to their life. And so the way we sort of structure our things, I'll jump in sort of to my pedagogy to answer this question, is we use an approach in teaching called modeling instruction. It is an instructional approach that was sort of created by this group called the American Modeling Teachers Association, AMTA, and it's influenced a lot of my own thinking. And the idea is exactly what you were hinting at there, which is relevance for the students. And we start every new unit of study with a lab. And the idea behind those labs are I show them some equipment, show them what it can do. And I say, all right, what do we notice? And we leave it open-ended from there. We sort of transition from what do we notice to what can we measure. And then once we see what we can measure, we then ask ourselves, all right, how are these measurable things? How might they be related to one another? And then we've got an experiment. We're ready to go to town. And at this point, they've bought in because they're helping me design the experiment. And they know what they want to figure out, and they go do it. And so to get the freshmen in on day two, day one is name game, so I get to know the kids. But on day two, we start with experiments right away. And we set up 11 different lab stations, and the thread which unifies all of those stations is the question, where is the energy? So we're looking for energy stuff. And and the stations are fun. And so it's a way for the students to look for or to make observations and to have a lot of fun with it. And so some of the stations that come to mind is we take a bowling ball and suspend it from the ceiling. I've got really high ceilings, so they're maybe 15 feet up in the air, and we swing it back and forth. We've got a big pendulum going. And we're looking at transfers of energy from the Earth's gravitational field. This is up high in the air, and then it swings down, and that becomes motion energy, kinetic energy. We take an Alka-Seltzer tablet, put it in a film canister, put some water in there, put the cap on, turn it upside down, and boom, it goes flying into the air. So we've got a little rocket we make for ourselves. We have a hammer that's attached to a rollerblade wheel that we can lift the hammer up and let go, and it swings back down, and it rams into a steel ball that we have fixed into place. We put a piece of paper between those two. It makes a hole in the paper when the hammer hits the steel ball. We observe that paper a little bit closer. We see some burning around the edge of the hole. It's singed there. And so that's an observation we can make. We take a basketball, put a tennis ball on top of it, drop both at the same time. And when they rebound off of the ground, the basketball on the bottom transfers a lot of its energy to the tennis ball on top, and it really just rockets into the air. And so on day 2, we hit students with a lot of different opportunities to explore the world around them, things they see in their everyday life, these little rocket things, tennis ball, a basketball, a hammer, but then start thinking about them at the scientific level of what are the observations I'm making as I approach these stations in a systematic way, and what do I notice from that? And then that serves as a fun way to introduce the course. And I heard on that second day from one of my freshmen this last week that they were talking to one of their friends, and they said, it's kind of nervous about high school, but if this is what high school is, this is going to rock. And so we really use that as our way for engagement, is get them in the lab, get their hands dirty, and then use that as our hook for how do I start thinking about how these scientific principles apply to these things that I see in my life.
Rockets, explosions, hammering things. Allie's got me. I'm done. Amen.
I know, right? You like such a hook, and this is why we wanted you, to share kind of your experience, because you do things differently than pretty much any science teacher I've ever met, and you really lean into what we would kind of label here at Disrupt Education, like connecting the learning to reality. And this whole series is like going beyond the score, which is something that ever since I've met you, you could have, yes, we have to grade and assess students, but it's not at the core of your practice. And your practice is really kind of what you just explained through this beautiful modeling thing. And yes, this is how you start off the year, but it's certainly something you grow into. But it's also something that students aren't necessarily used to. And then also, when I was going through, my own educational journey, and then even like student teaching in my master's program, it wasn't a model, ironically, that I saw. So how did you kind of get into this way of teaching and approaching your practice this way? Because it's just not as common as maybe it should be.
Yeah, that's a great question. So how did I get to this place? It starts in my first year of teaching. And my first year of teaching, I think a lot of teachers do this. I just tried to copy my high school physics teacher and just be him, but as myself. And he was very traditional. I liked his class a lot. I learned a lot. But he very much said, here's the facts about physics. I'm going to write them on the board. We're going to have some maybe cartoon examples that are funny to help illustrate these points, but I am saying this is what the physics is. And then I will show you this demonstration of maybe a pendulum going back and forth, and we will time how much time it takes to go back and forth, and we'll compare that to what I said the time would be, and we'll go, oh my gosh, they're the same number. Physics works. And that's very traditional for how physics has been taught in the past. And so I tried that. That's how I started things off. And I remember when I was giving my first test ever to a group of physics students, as they were taking the test, thinking, my God, I'm the best teacher around. They're going to do so great on this test. It's going to be awesome grading. This is going to be a breeze. And then I got the tests back, and that was not the reality. In fact, the things I thought they had learned were not what they didn't learn anything. I wouldn't say that. Maybe that's a little bit too hard on myself, but they didn't learn as much as I had thought. And so I remember going to my assistant principal in a state of panic almost, of like, oh my God, they did not learn what I thought they learned. What do I do? How do I fix this? How to make this better? And she almost talked me off a ledge a little bit. She's like, Joe, it's okay. It's not as bad as you think it is. Let's just think about where are the areas we need to do some relearning and reteaching, and how can we make sure the grade reflects the learning. Like, she was very supportive, but that really stands out to me as the first moment where I realized I need to figure something else out. This isn't working the way I want it to. And so I did a lot of reading, a lot of research, and I was on Twitter at the time as a physics teacher. I still am. I use that platform to network with other physics teachers throughout the country. But I was just getting started with it. One of my education professors had encouraged me to do it. And I was able to connect with some of the teachers on there who were using this modeling approach and who are members of this American Modeling Teachers Association. And so I kind of looked at what they were doing, just from what they were posting about their classroom on Twitter and through some blog posts they would share. And as I looked at that, I said, that looks much more like what I want my classroom to be. Because instead of me being the authority who's sharing the wisdom of physics from down on high, the kids are the ones that are the authority in the classroom, figuring things out because they have bought into, this is an experiment I can do and I want to figure out what's going on. And so I joined this organization. I started reading about their teaching philosophies, their curricular resources. And that first year of teaching, I didn't implement everything I was reading about at the time. I wasn't ready for it, but I started to incorporate more of their practices into my own teaching. And the kids ended up doing better. They started learning some stuff, and we were all having more fun with it too. And so it really was a matter of me bombing at teaching and then reflecting on, how do I not suck? And sort of it led me in this direction.
How does it not suck? I love that. That's now I'm going to say, you're in St. Louis, and I'm a White Sox fan, so I feel you on the Cardinal side. But I do remember the Cubs saying, just try not to suck, which is funny. But kind of going along with that, right? So, understanding the learning processes that you've changed and kind of going through the modeling group and, the group on Twitter and things like that, the traditional education system has always been numeric, right? Like, what's your grade? What's your number? But we also know that, certain data is important. But then how else do you measure that? So I'm going to go into a deep question here, but I think you can handle it. What do you think the purpose of school? What does it serve?
There's a lot of different answers to that, right? I think the common answer you get from a lot of folks when you ask that question, it doesn't really resonate with me. I don't know if that's borne out in reality, but the common answer you get is to build good citizens, to build our democracy. I hear that one a lot.
Yep.
And I don't know if I want to serve the kids in my classroom. I don't know if I want to serve democracy in that sort of abstract sense.
We don't get paid enough.
Right. I'm not sure that's what we're doing either. In my more cynical feeling, sometimes I think school serves as just a place for kids to be and be sad for a little bit, and then they grow out of it.
I don't love that, but I love the idea.
Sometimes school is just a place where kids go and feel bad, and then they graduate.
Yeah.
I don't think it's always that either. Like, I do think a lot of great things are happening in our schools. I wouldn't be working in them if I didn't think that were the case. Because I've seen students time and time again overcome obstacles, create amazing things. So, like, there's a lot of wonderful things that are happening in our schools because of our schools. So it's not just the negative aspects, but as I keep rambling here, what purpose is school currently serving? There is an education piece to it. Like, it's not kids aren't graduating from 12th grade, having been in a district for 12, 13 years and not learning something. That piece is there. I do think the primary purpose of schools is teaching and learning. And I do think that a lot of that is happening. So I'd say that exists. Like, certainly our kids know stuff that they didn't know before. They're able to think in creative ways that they weren't able to think before, or to grow those skills. But I do also think some of the rigid structures we put in place may foster creativity in some aspects, but then stamp out creativity in others. So I do think both can be happening depending on the experience a kid has, you know, which adults they interact with, which school districts are going through, all of those sorts of things. And so it's complicated is really what it comes down to. That's not a revelation that life is complicated and school is complicated, but it's mixture of teaching and learning is the focus. Most adults that work within schools keep that focus and work to make that the reality. And a lot of kids will see successes and failures throughout that process.
Right. This whole series is about, I mean, we've talked to people who are like, throw out the whole system, you know, and you kind of, and then there's people who, we just talked to someone, you know, that really they just want it to be a little bit more kind of like an apprenticeship model almost. But, you know, there's this gamut, and you kind of hinted in your answer about like there are some rigid structures that maybe prevent creativity or stifle it, or don't maybe necessarily expound upon it in ways that we could maybe emphasize. So when we think about education in schools, like what are some things that come to mind that would kind of break some of those structures that could enhance the learning experience? And maybe, you know, what you didn't answer in like, what purpose could schools serve? You know, how could that kind of help grow that idea?
I don't have all the answers, but
yes,
part
do.
of the answer. Okay, great. I've got them all. Let's go. Let's solve education in the next like 20 minutes. Great.
From your lens, of course, though.
No, but sure. I think the answer lies somewhere in grading. Like, certainly, I think, and it's complicated because anytime I try to go to a looser structure in grading, I've tried it a few different ways. It has been so beneficial for some kids. Students who wouldn't have taken risk because they were afraid of getting a bad grade, all of a sudden are taking risks that they wouldn't have before. I've got a great example of that before I go on. So in my AP Physics 2 class this year, it's a very small class. I started off with 5, a few more have trickled in. I've got like 7 right now. My grading system I'm excited for it. We'll see how it goes, but I'm not grading anything. We are doing lots of quizzes, lots of tests, lots of lab reports. I'm giving feedback on here's where things went well, here's where there's some room for improvement. We're creating a portfolio of our work, and then we are still in traditional school, grades still exist. I'll sit down with them at the end of each quarter, one-on-one. It's a small class, I can do that, and we'll say, here are the things I wanted you to learn this quarter, here are the skills we need to demonstrate, show me your work from this portfolio, which best shows that you've learned these things, and let's decide together on what letter grade we think best represents your learning, and that's what I'll put into our grade book. And because of that, I had one student this week, we're doing a lab on buoyancy, and we are trying to figure out a relationship between how much water gets displaced or pushed out of the way and how much upward force gets exerted on whatever object's in the water. And a student came in during some free time to finish collecting data for the required portions of the experiment. And he said, I came in to do this so that I could use the extra time in class to explore this other question that he had. And he said, I wanted to know that once the thing's fully submerged and I keep submerging it deeper and deeper, what effect does that have on this upward force of buoyancy? And I loved that. And it was like, he feels he has this opportunity to explore a question that he had, and he had the tools to do that. And so I think that removing penalties for curiosity could go a long way in promoting that. But it's a double-edged sword, because what works for one kid doesn't work for another kid. And some students will need that rigid structure and need to know this is exactly what we're looking for. A good graph looks exactly like this. Here is a checklist of this is exactly the details you need to include so that you are communicating your information effectively to whoever is reading it. And so when you start to be more loose and what helps one kid be creative, it stifles another kid's progress because they might need that extra support. And so a class like AP Physics 2, which usually has students who are very intrinsically motivated who sign up for it, the loose grading structure is helpful for those kids there. I'm not sure that's going to be true for every student that goes through the school. And so the answer, I think, lies in grading and how we assess. And what does it mean to have an authentic assessment that shows what the student knows and not were they able to comply with school, and that has some opportunity for expression of creativity that gets rewarded within that system. But it's so complicated because A, it's different for different individuals, what's actually effective, and B, we have in American culture a very strong sense of what a grade means as it traditionally has existed. And so anytime you try to mess with that a little bit, it really causes communication problems, especially not so much with students in my classroom, but with their parents who went through school in a more traditional time. And so there's a struggle with communication there. And so I think the answer lies in grading, an authentic grading that rewards actual creative thought while also provides clear expectations for this is what quality work looks like. But fine-tuning that and making that work is a messy process. It's a fun process. I like doing it in my classes, but it is messy.
I love the way you kind of break that down, and you can see so many layers to like one change in the system. And that's one of the things that I've always valued. For those of you who don't know, Joe and I used to teach together in the same building, and it was always interesting the dialogue we would have around just teaching practices and grading practices, and I've always enjoyed conversations with you, and that you're willing to try things, but also see like how if I change this one piece, it could affect this, this, and this. It's very sciencey of you, right? You know, to can think about all the variables and the controls that could happen there. But yeah, Peter, what are your thoughts from what Joe just said?
Well, I mean, it's brilliant. It really is. It does walk you through the steps of, you know, a student in a class, right? I've seen all those students. I teach business, which is funny because it's, you know, when you're talking about like the measurements and the experiments, I often say, especially in my entrepreneurship classes, is pay attention in your science classes, because basically what you are doing is you're experimenting. It's slightly different. We're not shooting things or rockets or anything like that, but we're trying to sell something, right? Product or service, and we have to test and see what happens. So I'm like, you are actually learning those skills, which I realize now, a little late, because I have those students. I have those students who really need some guidance, especially when they're building something. And then I have students that are just going to run with it. But in the end, I think that's very interesting. I really am a huge fan of the portfolio. I think peeling back the layers as a parent, because I have 2 teens myself, you know, seeing what does your portfolio look like right now? You know, I'd rather see that, frankly, than, all right, you got 6 A's, a B, and a C. Like, I really don't care about that, honestly, because that's subjective. What you, Joe, may grade my son on might be different from what Alli, although I know you probably too will be very close, but different teachers will do different things, right? So, you know, I kind of like that. And, you know, this young person who came back, and that's an amazing story. And thank you for sharing that. How do you think then education, even in a system, can better validate like a student who is picking something outside, just on maybe the fringe or the edges of physics? How do you think like the system can actually validate that student and then even, you know, help them go further, or can they?
Yeah, a question I wonder is, does the school system need to validate that, the system, and would doing so be helpful? I think certainly, and a very easy piece to do is, like, I encourage that as a teacher at an individual level, saying, hey, this is awesome. I love that question. Let's think about it together. But within the scope of what the class is, I wouldn't want to make that part of the structure of the class. Maybe not. Like maybe something vague, like do something creative, might be a nice standard to grade on. But for the most part, I want the grade to reflect you have learned the things for this class. And so when you go above and beyond, I think that's great. And I think that should be encouraged at an individual level. But baking it into a class, I do wonder what value it has. And so I do think offering students the opportunity to do those things is important. Extracurriculars are great for that. This particular student is on our high school robotics team, and I know he's able to find a lot of value in sort of the same sort of tinkering and creativity in that space. And so offering ungraded spaces like extracurriculars, I think is part of that solution. It exists. But then what does that look like beyond that is tricky. I will say, I'm going to share what one of my colleagues is doing with his AP physics class, which I think is very funny and it's great. Everyone that takes his class, it's like the hardest of the AP physics classes. And so like they're the high flyers. They want to challenge themselves. And you can do everything correctly in the class and get an A. But to get to the A plus, he has this extra you need to challenge yourself piece in a way that's creative. He's called it paths to plus. One of the paths is, I think he's left it very open-ended of do a project related to physics we've done. We'll talk about the project at the end of the year. I'm sure he's got a little bit more structure than that, but I do think he's given the space for students to really relate what they've learned to whatever aspect of life they want to and present that learning however they'd like. I'm sure some projects that he'll get will be students making their own musical instruments and talking about the physics behind, I made this string this long so that it would vibrate it 440 times back and forth each second, which relates to an A note. Like, I'm sure he'll have some of those sorts of things where students can build. Some might be more traditional presentations, but the kids will have the choice. The other option, it doesn't say this on his syllabus because he's worried about pushback from parents, but he's been unofficially calling it plus by combat, where the students do some challenge, and then if they win the challenge, they've earned the plus. And so he's thinking about doing mousetrap car races with that, and the winner of the race, they've earned their plus. He will do cardboard boat races where they build cardboard boats. We'll go to the pool at the community center and race those back and forth, and the winner of that race will have earned their plus. There are just some physics competitions in the greater St. Louis area that students can go to that, and if they do well, that they can earn their plus. So there's also ways you can win it by doing a competition and going and doing well. And so I think that's a fun way he's tried to encourage. In order to go from A to A plus, you have to stretch yourself a little bit, and I'll allow you to show me how you're relating this learning to other aspects of your life. And so within spaces like that, I guess it does make sense to try and provide within the structure of school an avenue for creativity. But because creative tasks are inherently open-ended, and because grading is inherently tied to some standard of what I want you to learn, those two are hard to marry sometimes. And I am a firm believer that just because something is valuable and adds value to your class, that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be assessed.
Like, you're pulling out a lot of elements, and it's interesting because you can really see like how to, Peter and I mentioned this before, of how to like think outside the box while inside the box, or like around the box. Right? Like, you're entrenched in this system that has grades, and we need to assess learning. But let's pretend for a minute here or two, okay, that you can throw away the box. Okay, you can create whatever educational system that you think would amplify, elevate, and create the best learning experience for students. Because we really like to ask this question, like, if you could create your own educational system of the future, there are no, you can start from scratch, you can burn it all down, all that. Like, when you think about, your experience as an educator, what what were some things that come to mind that you would put in place that would enhance learning and amplify this, you know, that we don't necessarily see in the current model?
I put a lot of thought into this, actually, of what my ideal school would look like if I could do something outside of the bounds of what we do. Um, and I don't know if I still feel if this is the best way, but when I first came up with this idea a few years ago, I absolutely loved it. And I do still think it's a lot of fun and it's worth sharing. I'd probably have some refinements I'd have to think through now as I get more experience as a teacher. But here's how it goes. It was inspired by the 1 year I went wholesale into a standards-based grading system. So a standards-based grading system is, instead of putting into the grade book quiz 1, quiz 2, quiz 3, test 1, whatever, the grade book says, I know how to plot an object's velocity versus time. I know how to draw a diagram of the forces that are exerted on an object. I know how to do these mathematical routines to solve for this variable, whatever. And then you give the student a sort of qualitative score based on how well they're able to perform at those skills. And then you reassess those skills multiple times throughout the year, and their grade on that skill evolves over time, usually for the better. Usually as we practice more, the score goes up. But in my system, I did allow the score to go down also if they showed that they had forgotten something over time. With my reason behind that being, I wanted the score to reflect the most recent evidence I had of what they do and don't know. And yes, it's a subjective grading system. All grades are subjective. This was, in fact, I think just more transparently subjective, and me saying, it's me judging you on these skills. Here's what I want you to know. So that was sort of the foundation that led me to this path of thinking of, I liked it better. I don't do it anymore because it was a lot of work, and especially the reassessment piece and the extra work compared to the extra benefit wasn't necessarily worth it. I might try to go back to it later. But the ideal system then is, first thing I think we need to do for sure is, if we're just burning things down, is eliminate like the classes you take being tied to your age. Because you get students who will go through this math sequence and they miss some foundational pieces, they didn't know them yet, and so then they end up at the next class and then they don't know how to do that class because they never learned those foundation pieces, but they're a year older and so they're supposed to be in this year older class or whatever. And vice versa, the other happens where a student can learn what takes maybe the average student a whole year to learn, can learn it in a few months, and then they're very bored. And so tying learning to ages doesn't make a whole lot of sense, I don't think, besides it works for when you're trying to educate a large group of people. But in an ideal system, I don't know that's what we want. And so it would have to be more self-directed. Whatever this school system is, in some way, it would have to be more self-directed. And so I'm imagining little self-learning modules and things where there's like small groups that meet every now and then. And you're in a building where there are subject matter experts that also have pedagogical content knowledge. So you have teachers, but they aren't necessarily leading a class. They are more offering guidance as students progress through this thing. And then there are assessments, but it's closer to a merit badge system than anything else. You have shown me that you can solve a quadratic function. Boom, you get the quadratic function stamp. And you're collecting these as time goes on, that you have these evidence that I've learned things. And then once you've shown you can do one thing, you're ready to learn the next thing. And so you're going at a pace that matches your learning. And within that, I would think that you could have more opportunity for some of these creative outlets too, of how do I demonstrate that I've learned, how to relate the vibrational frequency of a string to the note I hear on an instrument. How can I go ahead and show that? And then you can, the student has some choice in demonstrating that knowledge. And so I'm imagining where people aren't working necessarily with their age peers, but with people who they get along with, and they can struggle together in some of that, and then come together as a small group of their choice, or maybe it's not their choice, who knows, and demonstrate knowledge when ready. And the students have the ability to go from teacher to teacher or room to room as needed. And I think it sounds very nice. Now, the flaws in this system are they do in a lot of ways require an intrinsically motivated student. Because I don't know if I'd force a kid to do math, but I think if you got rid of it's a requirement, a lot of kids would find some joy in those types of thinkings that they don't find joy in right now because it's forced on them. So I do actually think you'd get more buy-in from a lot of the kids studying math in that way than they did when it's forced upon them. But certainly not everyone's going to choose that route if it's just like a go at your own pace, do your thing. And so the motivation piece would be challenging. And certainly this thinking requires a lot more of like one-on-one time between an adult and a student, or one adult for a small group of students. And so it would require either a lot more personnel or different spaces or something like that would make it more challenging to staff. And so like there are reasons why this dream might just be a dream, but I think it'd be cool to have the kids learn what they want to learn at their own pace, get some stamps saying, boom, I learned this thing, and then get some guidance from adults saying, all right, you've learned this. How have you thought about this next step yet, and pushing them in that next direction?
I like the challenge of, the intrinsic learner, the curious learner. And I often ask myself that same question, and thank you for sharing that, because it does sound like a fun place to be, and I think we do get in the way of students. Alli and I have had that conversation. I often tell my own students, you could graduate high school in 2 years if you really wanted to. I mean, or even less. Actually, we've interviewed people who've done that. And I'm just wondering then, is maybe in the elementary stages where we start to crush curiosity and creativity. I mean, I'm a Sir Ken Robinson fan, so, maybe and we don't have to answer this today, but I think the question is, how do people become intrinsically motivated? How do they stay or continue? Everybody learned how to do something like when they were young. They got up on their feet and walked, and even though they fell. So that's very interesting. I really like that. Alli, what do you think?
It's interesting because it's like the teacher take on some of the student takes that we've heard, of really like, once you build that foundation, of these kind of foundational skills, and you can do those in a more maybe traditional model, is throw it out and let people go, let people be free to explore and develop. And I just have like this beautiful picture in my mind with this merit badge idea of like people literally like having like their stickers or like their backpacks like adorned with it, and it's like you're literally showcasing. It's kind of this portfolio piece where it's like, look, these are the things I'm proud of and I've learned and I've mastered, and they're like out there. And I just think there's a lot of kind of that momentum building and kind of the show and tell-esque learning that is kind of missing from our current models, right? Where we're like forcing, like, you have, in order to graduate, you need to do this, and you need to take these classes, you need to sit in them for this long, and all of these components. So it seems more playful. It seems like, I really like what you said, Joe, on how like we won't know how students would react to it, and like, and what supports we would need, but like we do know like how many kids we're missing out on right now, right? So like, why not try something new or have alternative pathways? Like maybe don't blow up the whole school, but like let's just try this and build it and see what happens, like an experiment, like if we don't have data for this dream, like, we're just going to imagine it. But I mean, me and you being scientists, we're like, let's just tinker, let's just try stuff, right? Like, what could be so wrong with letting kids explore a little more? Like, I mean, I know some administrator or somebody in policy is going to be like, well, all of these things could go wrong, but I just think that we're missing a bigger picture here. And so thank you so much, Joe, for sharing some of those ideas.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of that a little bit in that I was thinking about, as I was preparing for the podcast and thinking about, like, one of the things you'd ask me is, like, in what ways am I a disruptor of education? And I think my full answer is just, I'm not. For a lot of my kids, I'm the man, right? I am the person in front of the classroom. Like, I am in the system. I am there. But I do think about how to make it better and improve it, right? One thing that does come to mind when I think about experimenting in my classrooms, I very much do treat my classroom as an experiment, and like, how do I improve it? How do I tinker with things? And I like to think of school in that bigger picture when I can. But I do like want to caution that things could go worse if you experiment in a certain way, and maybe things aren't bad or are bad for a lot of kids now, but you could change in a way that would make it worse. I think that would do a disservice to kids. And so I don't have just a sort of laissez-faire, let's do whatever sort of approach to it either. But yes, I mean, if we want to capture all kids and who they are, definitely we need to continue to make improvements on what school is for those kids and make some changes. No doubt. I saw something on Twitter, I think yesterday, that really kind of struck me is, and it's related to this. The person said, if you want schools to be better, which I do, if you want schools to be better, there's two things you have to acknowledge. One, schools are a lot better than they were 100 years ago. And two, they're not where we want them to be yet. And so recognizing that progress has happened, because I think we can get stuck in this, oh, we're in this industrial revolution, conveyor belt model, we've been there for hundreds of years and hasn't changed. I don't think that's true. Like, I think more creative things are happening in our schools now than have in the past. But the remnant of who we were when school started still exists and lingers in our identity. And so we do need to get better too. I think both of those pieces are there.
And I would also
absolutely both be true.
Right. I mean, I think I would add something if I'm going to pull the third piece of that, Joe, and I think I heard you say it kind of through your stories, is put the humanistic approach in the middle of it, right? Like, so find out where your client or your student are, where are they at, and then offer them these different opportunities within the system. So then, yeah, sure, we have students that are just killing it in school. They're doing great things, and they love the system, and it works for them, which, yeah, I'm not going to deny. But I think what you're also saying there is, how can we find things for where it's not working for the student in experiment? So I love that. I really like that look. Final thoughts, Alli?
I would push back on Joe not being a disruptor, because you are willing to challenge the status quo and not just do things because how they were done, right? So you're part of that progress. You're part of that movement. Maybe you're not part of like the let's burn down schools and just start over, but you're willing to have conversations around what is and isn't working. And that started from your first year, and it continues to evolve. And so that's just something that disruptors do.
Yeah, no, for sure. I've had this in all of my classrooms, which is, I've been in a few schools now, but I always hang up this little sign that just says, we've always done it that way, with a big red circle and a cross through it, as being the reminder of that's not the reason to keep doing something. And for sure, looking at how we can do things better and changing things there. What I meant when I said that is just, yes, I try to make it better, but you can only do so much when you're in the system itself, right? Because you are simultaneously trying to change it and make it better and disrupt the things that aren't working. But you are the person upholding what currently exists also, and you're enforcing the rules. And it's a weird line to cross as you're trying to make schools better for the kids you're serving.
I think it makes you unbelievably professional educator, number one, as somebody who is really living what you teach, right? You're experimenting constantly, and that's, I think students obviously know teachers who are there to collect the paycheck, pension, all that, and the people who live their dream. And then also, somebody's always questioning. I think we need more educators who, legitimately are going to question, maybe not as, unpatient as me, because that's how but to see these things, and even though change is slow, you still get to blow up things and shoot off rockets. So let's be honest, that sounds fun. So Joe, thank you so much for hanging out with us today, telling us your journey, giving us your experiences, and sharing your thoughts on education. I want to give you a moment here real quick to where can people connect with you, maybe even the modeling group and in the physics place, or how can people connect and ask you some more questions?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest way to find me out in the interwebs is on Twitter. That is where I'm most active as a teacher. My Twitter handle is at Mr. Joe Milliano. Joe for Joe, Milliano, Milliano. And then yeah, send me a DM there if you want to message me, reach out. That is the easiest way to find. If you Google my name, you'll find my work email too, and I can talk to you that way if you want. But that's where I'm on social media as a teacher.
Fantastic. And we'll put all that in the notes. Again, for Alli, I'm Peter Hostrawser. Thank you, Joe. We'll catch you all next time on Disrupt Education.